Ladies and gentlemen, both Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth have made significant comments in relation to the Russia Ukraine current war situation, with Trump putting pressure on Kiev and Ukraine overall to end this war. Pete Hegseth saying the borders are not going back to where they were pre Russia invasion. It's just not happening. It's not realistic. Right now, from what I saw, I believe Ukraine does have a little sliver of land, of Russian land that they're trying to negotiate with the Russians in terms of if we give you your land back, you give us the land. It's not going to work like that. If anything, and Hegseth is saying Ukraine is going to have to give up some land. That's just the way this works. All the experts admit it. We knew this was going to happen. Ukraine is going to be like, oh, this is ridiculous. It's appeasement to Russia. But no, this is just the power dynamic between Russia and Ukraine. If you wanted a war to end, the only way to get it to end, especially with Trump's waning support for Ukraine, if Ukraine doesn't have the United States, they've got really no leg to stand on because the United States is NATO. We're going to be contributing the most to Ukraine in terms of money because of how big our military budget is combined versus all of the rest of the NATO countries. It's not even close. So if there's waning support for Ukraine from the United States, Ukraine really has no leg to stand on. They don't have any leverage and they need to negotiate an end to this war. And this might be Trump saying it's time to do it ASAP. Now you can see they've picked out this clip and they're like, oh, Trump says Ukraine may be Russian someday. Well, that's a bigger clip, a bigger quote on what Trump was saying. He said they might be Russian someday. They might not be Russian. So we don't know. What we do know is there's two territories in eastern Ukraine where most of the citizens speak Russian and their culture is more Russian. And that's what the Russians, we would presume, want in some type of peace negotiation. Hegseth did point out that it's very important that we put safeguards in place so this isn't a rearmament situation for Russia, because you could argue, and certainly a lot of people would agree, that this war has been a failure for Russia. Everyone thought they were going to get Kiev within 2 weeks. I give credit to Ukraine for fighting them off, even though people say, well, it's with Americans' taxpayer money. Still, that's a relatively good situation. It is very complicated, but the idea that we would be funding a war without any American bloodshed and we would kind of by proxy be weakening a foreign adversary, that is a good thing there. But it's not, war is not good overall, and also it's going to alienate Russia against the United States, which in the long run can be a bigger problem because it's basically becomes East versus West, and that's how a potential world war breaks out. When it comes to this situation, we will take a look, and you can see Donald Trump on what he said, quote, Ukraine may make a deal. They may not make a deal. They may be Russian someday, or they may not be Russian someday. But we're going to have all of this money in there meaning Ukraine, and I say I want it back, Trump said in a Fox News interview that aired Monday. You've also got this. The president also said that the U.S. had essentially agreed a deal with Ukraine would see Washington receive rare earth and mineral resources, which are used predominantly in electronics, in return for ongoing support. It's a very similar situation with Taiwan. Basically, Trump is treating these foreign affairs like it's pay for play, or if you will. If you want our support, you need to give us something in return. Same thing with Taiwan, with the semiconductor chips, getting those. With this, they want rare earth minerals, which is interesting because Greenland has a bunch of those, and it's more than 500 billion. But you can see Trump saying he wants the equivalent of like 500 billion. See, this is not going to happen. I'm just saying that right now. To me, I think this is Trump trying to force Ukraine into a negotiation. $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals, and they've essentially agreed to do that, according to Trump. I guess we'll see what happens. I think this is mainly to try and force a peace negotiation. Trump is basically telling Ukraine, the gravy train here is ending. It's time to come to the negotiating table, and I think Russia does as well. Now, who knows with Putin, but it does seem like Russia, based on their military movements, the war has come to a screeching halt. And the past few months, even with the escalation with the long-range ballistic missiles that were launched, that's more so to gain leverage in a negotiation. That's how I would guess that would be done. But $500 billion worth of rare earth. And again, this is the whole America First movement. We're not just going to give these foreign countries, especially a country located in Eastern Europe, all of this money. I mean, yes, you could argue for the United States, depending on how much of a threat. It depends how much of a threat you view Russia. If you really don't view Russia as that big of a threat, then giving Ukraine money is kind of a waste. If you do view Russia as a threat, and that's why you have the Republican-Democrat dynamic. Republicans are more scared of China. Democrats are more scared of Russia. That's why Democrats are obsessed with giving Ukraine all this money to fend and to fight Russia. They don't have a good read on the situation. There would be no Nazi Germany 2.0 where they tried to take over all of Europe. It just can't happen. They don't have the military strength to do it, and it would never escalate to that point, because the second that Russia would invade more of those Eastern European countries, it would escalate even further, and it would have to involve NATO troops contacting Russian soldiers, and at that point, it would be Russians very likely firing off nuclear bombs or escalating the war to a point to where the troops almost become irrelevant, and it's just global warfare that we don't want. So whether or not this comes down to how much do you view Russia as a threat? How big of an adversary are they against the United States? One of the things that people always say about Russia is they have the most nuclear bombs. Well, that's disclosed nuclear bombs. Based off of technology advancement, we would expect China and the United States to have more, I would say, superior. I'm not saying Russia's nuclear arsenal is not good. Based off of technology advancement in the countries like the United States and China, those countries should have superior nukes to Russia. But they don't disclose it. So everyone says, well, Russia has all these nukes. They have, crazy new technology like the extremely fast hypersonic missiles. Well, I'm sure the United States has those as well. I'm not trying to make this a United States' superior thing. It's also China, who I think is probably pretty sophisticated when it comes to nuclear bombs. I think U.S. and China are 1A, 1B. Europe must own the conflict. Well, yes, this is more of the situation to where Trump is saying this is a European issue. When you look at where the United States is, and with a war like this, it is geography. We're surrounded by two oceans. Yes, Germany is going to care a lot more. So here's the thing with NATO. Germany is going to care a lot more about the situation in Ukraine than the United States, just based off of where we're located within the world, of course. Now, we don't want the situation to escalate. We're going to care about it as well. That's why Trump is trying to intervene here and get peace. But the idea, and this is what NATO says, that the United States must give in the 2% or whatever it is in total GDP to help the defense of these European countries, when based on where we're located, it just doesn't make sense for us to do that. I mean, if you really want to get down to it, you look at a map, Germany, Italy, the UK, Poland, all of these other countries, they should be paying a lot more based off of, percent GDP for this war. If they want to support Ukraine, if they're that afraid of Russia, because of where they're located, it's a lot bigger of a situation for them than it is for the United States. Now, if the United States deems it necessary, we will reassess it and potentially intervene. We're trying to end the war, basically. But it's if Russia gets extremely powerful, there might be an issue there. But it's just not happened. And I think the NATO agreement is prehistoric, and it was something that was done 75, 80 years ago, and it doesn't make sense for modern time. Any expert will agree, based on how big the United States military is, individual agreements with specific countries makes more sense because of how giant and bloated the United States military has become. Intertwining us with very small countries to where if they engage with an Eastern threat causes the United States to go to war is a very risky proposition, because that's what NATO says with Article 5. So I'm not going to make this a NATO thing, but that's just kind of the reality of the problem with NATO, and it's not balanced right now. Pete Hegseth making his first big comments on Ukraine. He says no NATO membership for Ukraine. Well, that's just, and this is bipartisan. This is not, oh, we love Russia, so we don't want NATO to, or we don't want Ukraine to join NATO. It does not make sense for Ukraine, based on Article 5, land bordered with Russia, to join NATO. You are inviting World War III. It does not make sense at all. That is something that does not need to happen. No return to pre-2014 borders. It's impossible. I mean, look at where they're at right now. Russia has annexed land into eastern Ukraine, why would they give that up in a negotiation? No U.S. troops in Ukraine. I think everyone agrees on that. No more relying on U.S. for the majority of military funding. So that's the United States trying to separate from the idea that we need to be responsible to fund this because NATO is behind it. Well, yeah, most NATO countries are in Europe, so they're going to be behind this because this is a very big thing for them based on where Russia is located. It just doesn't make sense for the United States based on where we're located. This is government efficiency. This is understanding where to spend our money. And so we have our smart military leaders now that they've gotten in with Trump and his advisors realizing that, well, we've done a threat assessment on Russia, and this doesn't make any sense what we're doing in terms of spending all this money. Now, you could argue at the beginning, if Russia was trying to take all of Ukraine, then yes, it would make sense to try and stop that. But the war is at a point to where it's such a big standstill. It does seem like both sides are just fighting for leverage for negotiations. And I think everybody knows this, and that's why I think Trump is saying, we're pretty much done funding Ukraine. If you guys want money, we need your natural resources. And natural resources have been such a huge thing for Trump. He's really going for countries' resources. I think it's a really good strategy, and it's all done legally and diplomatically. It's just like when Trump goes about acquiring Greenland, and you've got all these European countries angry about it. They haven't built up their militaries big enough to challenge the United States when it comes to a territorial acquisition like that. And so with Greenland, it's going to be the easy way or the hard way. And if these it's just like the Canada situation. These countries destroy themselves through third world immigration, and then they sit there and they cry when the United States takes advantage of it. It's not our fault you destroyed your own country and your entire culture. It's very sad what happened, but we need to say Greenland here, and you're gonna cry. Listen, you didn't build your stuff up big enough to challenge us. We can just do these things now. So when you've got a situation like this, Hegseth and Trump are on the same page. The funding to Ukraine is done, and if funding happens, the United States is getting natural resources back for it. And there will be a negotiation. You could argue that Russia gains a little bit of leverage over Ukraine in a negotiation because the United States, obviously it's different with the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, but now with the Trump administration, they do not back Ukraine to the degree that they did. Technically, you could argue they still back them because Trump is saying we're willing to give you money, but you need to give us natural resources in return. And my guess is Ukraine probably is like, yeah, I'm not sure on their situation with natural resources, but based on where the war is at right now, Ukraine is probably like, yeah, let's do that deal. They really have no intention of doing the deal. They just don't want to lose leverage. And if you go into a negotiating period and Russia's like, you don't have the United States on your side, it's going to be very hard for Ukraine to negotiate a good peace deal for them without the United States. So they're saying, yeah, they want to still appear as having a good relationship with the United States and being allied with the U.S. and with NATO. And they're still, the European countries are still funding them. That's why it's different when you have European countries based on where they're located, landlocked with Russia and the United States, which is cut off. You've got the entire Atlantic Ocean, and then you've also got the Pacific. I guess there is the Bering Strait with how close Alaska is to Russia, but so much of that land is uninhabited, and it would just be, an invasion from there would be a mess for Russia. So it just wouldn't happen. It's just based off of where we're located. We're in a very advantageous spot. But either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.